In the last video, we created this button together and we went ahead and named the instance of that button. And if we test our movie, we see that what happens is that the movie launches, but it stops on that first frame. So what we need this button to do is just simply to play, because this is the very next thing that comes up. So we're going to use the code snippets again. It's important that when you use the code snippets for a button that you actually select the button. So we'll go up to Window, Code Snippets, Action Script, and then again, you kind of make a guess here. Well, yeah, I want the timeline to move, so let's try that. You're in good hands with a button if you find something that says click. So there's not anything that does exactly what I want, but this is pretty close, saying go to a certain frame and play. So let's try this. And now, if we didn't have this button selected, and we double clicked here, what would happen is just a little pop-up would say, hey, you need to pick whatever you're trying to make the click work on. But since we have it selected, we're just going to go double click here. Now it's going to put all this code in. Again, keeping in mind that at this level, you don't need to understand exactly what this stuff's doing, as long as you can put it in here and make it work. I'm just going to go through real quick and tell you in my words what happens here. This is extremely important. You see that it says guide button, and so that code snippet put that in for us, this guide underscore BTN. And if you remember back, that's the name that we came, well, you can't see it anymore here, but that's the name that we named that instance. So what this is doing is it's targeting that button. Now remember, I told you that blue is computer talk, and there you see the stop that we put in earlier. So this is saying add event listener, which basically means this thing is waiting for an event to happen. It's listening, waiting for something to happen. The event that it's waiting for is a mouse event, and that mouse event is a click. So you might see this say like, mouse over, mouse out, different options like that maybe you've seen playing games or navigating people's websites that have JavaScript in it, because this is very similar to JavaScript, this language here. Then this right here, notice it's not in blue. This is a made up name right here, but they went with kind of a descriptive name that's saying when you click, you go to and play a frame, and then this is the actual function. And so what that means is that when this happens, it triggers this function. So then we have to come down here and define what the actual function is, and notice this is color coded again, so that's computer talk. That's saying this is what happens when this button gets clicked, and what's happening is that it goes to a certain frame because of this mouse event, and then this is void here, which sometimes you can add details that would later be used in a different function or whatever. This one you typically don't need to worry about until you get really advanced. And then this is what this function actually does. So again, it's computer talk. Now, I want you to see something here just for the sake of learning. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it down here. Now in the end, we're just going to use what we do down here and we'll get rid of this one, but I think it'd be kind of nice if you can see side by side what's happening here. So really, all that we need here is for it to play. Now we could, and in fact, I'll show you something here real quick. I'm just going to put in fact, you should probably try this with me, but you'll have to do two things. Is we'll pick a much higher number, and I think we had like 140 frames. So I'm going to put 100 in here. So what this means is go to and play frame 100. Now, I said we want to have this up here as a reference, but we need to code it out. So we need to do the asterisk and a forward slash, and then we need to finish this up with the opposite of that, which is a no, sorry, told you wrong. It's a forward slash and an asterisk followed by an asterisk and a forward slash. So now that's commented out, so it's like it's not even there, and then this is what's going to happen. So let's go ahead and test that. So doing a command return to preview this in the browser, we see that it stops like we expect. And by the way, that's something to look for right away. If this thing starts playing, then remember, as I talked about in the last video, it doesn't mean that that stop is wrong. It could mean that something else down the road is wrong, and more likely in our case, what we just wrote is wrong. But it looks like it's good. Now, if we clicked here and we just had a play button, it would keep playing from here, which would first take us into animation along a guide path. But since we put in like frame 100, it's going to jump ahead in the video and start to play. So there you go. It jumped way ahead and it's playing. Now I'm going to go back into the code. And if you lost your code, remember you just go up to Window and Actions. And I want you to see how simple this could be. One, if you're just trying to write the code on your own and you realize what you have, and it's a go to and play, then you realize you're on frame 1 when you're starting. All you'd have to do is change this to a 2 and it would play there. But there's even one step simpler than that, and that is just simply, instead of stop, it becomes play. Now, because this is computer talk, you have to be very careful here, and I'll show you what would be the mistake. Is that right there. You think, okay, I just got rid of everything but the play, but you notice it's black? Well, very, very sensitive. It needs to be a lowercase p, and then we're just going to take this out because it doesn't need a frame number. It looks exactly like stop. It just says play. And if we preview this now, it's going to do just exactly that. Click, and it starts to play right away from the beginning, and you can see we need to get rid of this. It's showing up all along the way, so let's take care of that right away. We'll just go back in to Flash, go to where that button appears. I'll go ahead and close this for a second, and right here's the button. So we just go to the frame after the first frame, do an F7, and that will no longer show up. So let's just talk about a couple more important things in this code to save you from future errors. So the important thing is that the name that we call the function from, or the area that we call the function from, and the name that we give it is the same exact name as the function. So and in fact, this made up name here is kind of misleading now because it says click and go to and play a frame. Well, that's not what's happening. So let's do this. Let's just call this something odd so we can see how unimportant the name is, but how important the consistency of the name is. In other words, I can call this something silly like Steve says go. Don't use any spaces. You can use camel casing like they did here, and you can use underscores like they did here. So what's important is that this and this are the same. If they're not, if there's any little discrepancy, even an uppercase and a lowercase discrepancy, you'll go to preview the movie and the whole thing starts playing, the stop no longer works, and then if you go back here and read what the actual problem is, it'll try to help you. It'll say that it's occurring in frame 1, it's in line 25 of the code, and there is an undefined property of Steve says go. So we go back into the code, and we just need to make sure that this, Command C to copy, and this, Command V to paste, are identical. Now, if down the road we accidentally use this name again in a different function, then we'll get a different error. So each independent function needs to have its own name. And luckily, the code snippets have become very sophisticated in recent years, and they're aware of this. So now we can go ahead and get rid of, and in fact, since this is no longer accurate description, we can get rid of even the extra bits there. F and delete, get rid of all of that. So now what happens is we have the stop, and then we have the button saying what happens next. Before we move on to do any more coding, we definitely want to get in there and make sure that this is working properly. And so all that does is just say, go ahead, play. I stopped you with the stop command, but now I'm telling you to play. So the next button, we want to go ahead and jump to our next topic. I followed all the steps from the last video to create a button here, and we'll worry about the positioning and making this look pretty once we get another button in there. But for now, I have this button in my library, and remember, since this is the button really living here and this is just an instance, we need to name this instance so the code can talk to it. That's probably one of the most overlooked steps when new people try to write code for buttons. So we do need to go into the properties here, and I'll just call this easing underscore btn, short for button, and we'll go ahead and go into the code hinting with this selected and see what we come up with, which now we do. In fact, before we do that, we want what it gave us last time is to go ahead and play to another frame. So really we should figure out what frame that is. And so easing starts right, boom, right there. So that's where we want it to jump to. So that is, if I click right on this frame, that's frame 100. So I need to remember that. Go back to the first frame, actually physically select the button, go to Window, Code Snippets, go into Action Script, and then we want a timeline navigation, and what we want is to click and go to a frame and play. So we're going to double click on that, and this time it's going to pretty much have everything that we need. Gave us a made up name, and see, it even remembered last time that it used this name, and this time it put an underscore 2 in front of it here and here to keep us safe. So all we should have to do now is change this to frame 100, preview that movie, and let's see that it does work. So, well, again, both of our buttons have that nice interactivity to them, and if we click here, we expect to jump ahead to easing, and voila. Okay, so I now have the third button ready to go. I'm going to show you something that's not only helpful for organization. Let's just first talk about it as organization. So now we need to find out where the masking starts. Ooh, and it looks like I may have put that button in the wrong place. So let me grab that and make sure. Yeah, see how it ended up on my actions layer. Shame on me. So I'm going to do an edit, cut, and then click there and do an edit, paste in place. Okay, much better because I've got that F7 afterwards that makes it disappear. So we need to find out where masking starts, which is right here. So we could click here, write this number down, put it in the code. But first of all, just for housekeeping, and this is considered part of an action. I mean, you could technically make another layer for this, but keep it right on the actions layer. We're going to do a F7 here, and we're going to, almost like we named the instance, we're going to create what's called a label. And so I'm just going to call this label masking, hit enter, and what that does is it puts this flag here so that when I'm scrolling through things I can see, okay, here's where my masking starts. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for where easing starts. Put in F7, just call this easing. So not only is that nice for housekeeping, but watch this, it can also be, instead of having to remember which frame this started at, we can actually tell it to go to the label instead of the frame. Back at frame 1, click on the button, go up to Window, go up to Code Snippets, Action Script, Timeline Navigation, click and go to Frame and Play. Now the difference is, instead of a frame number, we put in the name of our label between quotation marks. And if we test this, we can see that it is doing as it's told. The only problem is